I think I alluded to this a little bit in my presentation this morning. But most of the energy transition scenarios out there, when you start looking at moderate or rapid energy transition futures, they all see some sort of a moderation in energy demand. Some scenarios, especially rapid, aggressive energy transition scenarios, you actually see energy demand stagnating after a period of time. But in other cases, the growth moderates quite significantly, right? So I think this is a piece that is not well understood. And the driver here for this is essentially some version of energy efficiency, right? And so there are a couple charts here where we are showing what the change in, we are showing some metrics that reflect energy efficiency. So the chart on the left, for example, shows the change in energy consumption over this period of time on a per capita basis, and then it's the same change in energy but on a per dollar of GDP basis on the right-hand side, right? And what you see is that there is a base level of energy efficiency improvement that we have seen historically, a little short of 0.5%, if you will, or maybe more like 0.25%. And we are assuming that we'll see the same kinds of energy efficiency improvements in a business as usual scenario, right? But if you want to see these kinds of growth in energy efficiency that is implicit in some of the future energy transition scenarios, then we essentially have to see energy efficiency increasing by 4 to 8x, right? And interestingly, when we look at some segments of energy demand, we are actually seeing much higher improvements in energy efficiency, but not in some other segments. So buildings is another case where historical improvement in energy efficiency has been very muted, but that accounts for a pretty significant chunk of energy, and we need to see energy efficiency of buildings improve by as much as, say, 5x or so. In comparison, we are showing energy efficiency in transportation on the right-hand side, and it feels like we're at a point of diminishing returns. Additional improvements in energy efficiency on the transportation side are going to be limited here going forward. Again, I alluded a little bit about the study that we are doing on sustainability in electric utilities, in particular in emerging markets. And what we are seeing is, and this is probably old hat for you, Brandon, but the focus around sustainability today has shifted away from traditional environmental pollutant emission reductions to more like decarbonization, grid resiliency, redundancy, and we'll talk a little bit about that here. We are seeing a lot of interest in small modular nuclear reactors, and there's lots of new product offerings there. This is just a page that lists a lot of these product offerings where they are. One of these technologies is being commercialized by Dow in their one of their chemical plants here on the US Gulf Coast. So that's something that we are tracking very carefully as part of our research in the chemical space. But the challenge of nuclear is that cost is an issue, schedule is an issue, permitting is an issue, and now it seems like feedstock is an issue. When we were putting these pages together, I told Maria Lopez, our analyst, that I want pages on small modular nuclear reactor, and she pulled this from our research and put this in together, and she said, everything is a problem with SMR. Why do you want to talk about this at the... So I thought that was a funny comment, but that in many ways, right, it's hard for nerds to kind of look at energy transition and say, how are we going to get there with our nuclear? But it's a very challenging problem. But anyway, so that brings us to our discussion here today. So maybe if we can start with a little bit of an intro to each of the panelists here, and especially their organizations. That will be a good starting point. But before that, Brandon, one of the pieces of feedback that we got from the survey last year was it was hard for people to keep up with the pace at which you were talking. Everybody's used to accelerating their podcast by 1.5x so that they can go through quickly. In your case, this is an oil and gas and energy
point taken
audience. So I'm half joking there. But Jane, maybe we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about Breakthrough Energy, what you work on, and then we'll go to Brandon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you for the opportunity and to discuss the energy transition and also innovation. My name is Jane Zhang. I'm a business fellow at the Breakthrough Energy. Breakthrough Energy was founded about 8 years ago by Bill Gates, and the purpose is to develop and also deploy at scale the critical solutions to achieve the net zero emissions. And I think one of the so-called focus areas, I think there are actually multiple focus areas. We frame them as a so-called 5 grand challenges. So they're electricity, manufacturing, transportation, buildings, and agriculture. So it's quite broad, but it's all focusing on funding, investing in cutting-edge startups, company, and when they come up with the innovation solutions to tackle challenges in those sectors. So there are 3 programs. One is called Breakthrough Energy Fellows Program. It's funding the early stage startups, the pre-seed, seed level. And the second one is called Venture. It's Breakthrough Venture. People probably heard quite a lot. Is the investment vehicle of Breakthrough Energy. And then the third one is a newer one, but increasingly and has more visibility and profile in recent years, is called Breakthrough Catalyst. So Breakthrough Catalyst providing project finance to the first of kind of projects. So that's kind of in the nutshell, quick summary. And as of today, we are funding, supporting over 100 portfolio companies, startups, companies. And as I mentioned, working in those 5 grand challenge areas. And as a business fellow, a little bit about myself, I had an oil and gas background. I worked at Shell for 30 years, and both downstream and upstream. And as a business fellow at Breakthrough Energy right now, I'm working side by side with the startup companies and mostly supporting on the business side, commercialization side, the business models, marketing strategies, partnerships, and so on. Yeah.
Excellent, Jane. Thank you. Brandon?
Thanks, Jane, for being here and having me back. I'll try to keep it more simple. So I'm the power guy in the room, which is a little bit different, but for all industrial businesses, it's a top 3 or 4 OpEx item for the business, so it's important. And it's getting more complicated, and I know we're going to get into what we're seeing on the ground, but our business is Texas-based, but we operate in 48 states. We have just over 10,000 customers that range on the small end, someone that pays $100,000 a month for power up to the hyperscale data center universe, where it can be tens of millions of dollars a month, and really every vertical in between. We help that industry electrify to the grid, so it's everything from site selection, building everything outside of the building in an advisory capacity, so we're not an EPC firm, but the high voltage, medium voltage substations, and then we manage their energy procurement, whether that's production behind the meter in combination with the PPA, and then I'll leave it with this statement that I'm a believer that it's really not an energy transition. I hate that word. It's really an energy addition. I subscribe. We're going to use more oil in 2050 than we do today. We're going to do it differently. It's going to be cleaner, but it's not going away, so it's more of an addition. But we've got real issues. You brought up that first slide, the IEA data. What's interesting on that, like I agree with the lines, it makes sense, but the underlying data, if you look at their year-over-year revisions the last 3 years, they've gone up 6%, 6%, 8% in the underlying data. And if you think about just in your home, how many things do you plug in the wall, your kids, grandkids? You know, it's not just 2 plugs anymore, it's a cord, and then there's 10 USBs and versus 10, 20 years ago. And that's not just residential, that's businesses. So when I look at the demand that takes to be carbon neutral, we will not get there by 2050. It's just not going to happen. We're going to do everything we can. It's not a capital constraint, but there are other things on the ground that are limiting factors, making things really complicated.
So, Brandon, some of the data that I looked at suggested that, first of all, electricity demand is growing much faster, right? I mean, 10 years ago, the rule of thumb was it's growing at a 1% every year or something, right? That's no longer the case. It's growing much faster. And if you believe in energy transition, just for the sake of a term to use, right, it's going to grow much faster because everybody wants to electrify everything. And it seems like, just looking at the incremental growth that we are seeing, 40 to 50% of that is really coming from devices, it seems like, right? So I guess, can you talk a little bit about what you are seeing from growth in electricity demand point of view, and where is that incremental growth in particular coming from? So that's one. And part two of it is, I guess, are we going to continue to see growth in electricity demand in the near term? In the long term, the energy transition future and all of that, it makes sense. But I guess, let's say through the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Well, your chart showed a decline around 2035. I hope I'm alive in 2035, so who knows? That's just an interpolation in the model. I think demand is not going to curb off, because as we get smarter, prices are going to remain low. And I'll pick on Texas because this is where we sit, and I'm born and raised here, but I sit on Governor Abbott's large load task force, which is any type of industry, whether it's Samsung's chip factories or the electrolyzer movement going on the Gulf Coast, or the Bitcoin mining industry. I see those forecasts that are going out 10, 15, 20 years for this state. So normalized growth, including there's still around 800, 900 people moving to Texas a day. That has not slowed down. You can just look at license plates as you drive around. You can see it's actually happening. It's around 6%. And the other states are much lower to that, and some of those are negative. But then when you look at, if I have heavy industry, this is still the cheapest power market in the world. And it just is. And gas prices are low, and even in a higher gas price environment, it's very, very cheap electricity. Now, it doesn't make sense when we have a winter storm and we lose power for 4.5 days, but it's just the market design. Mm-hmm. And so what I see over that kind of long frame is continued growth. The solar movement's happening right now. The cheapest, cleanest form of energy is teaching businesses to shift operations, shut down, and basically take the inherent call option that the utility possesses, which is, I have a problem, it's hot or cold, I'm going to shut your power off and I'm going to get longer and you suffer. So our business, we manage around $3 billion of electricity bills a year. We have leverage where we say, hey, if you have flexibility, and this is going to be electrolyzers, and the Bitcoin mining industry is there right now, and at around $125 a megawatt hour at 50,000 a coin, they shut off. There's not a light bulb in those facilities, and the governor is actually requiring it behind the scenes. So all that keeps prices low. Mm-hmm. And it's not just demand, it's not just a 1 or a 0, it's when is the demand at what price, mm-hmm. is really the way we have to think about power. Like we do other commodities.
Yeah.
If gasoline's $20 a gallon, we don't drive as much. But if Winter Storm Uri hits, kids are out of school, they're still plugging their phones in, playing video games, like no one changes their behavior, and electricity is the only commodity we think of in that light, and that has to change.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brandon. Jane, how do you think about, and how does Breakthrough Energy think about the broader power utilities, electricity value chain, right? If you break it down, let's say between generation, transmission, distribution, I guess what are some big technology challenges in each of that, and how are companies trying to address that, maybe from within or outside the Breakthrough portfolio?
Yes, I think if you recall, I mentioned the 5 grand challenges. Mm-hmm. The first one is the electricity. And certainly during the last 10 years, the solar and wind, the renewable electricity deployment really made a huge progress, very significant progress. Even though the percentage, the installed capacity percentage is continue increasing, and year by year. Last year is about, if I read the IEA report, about 510 gigawatts new installed capacity, and coming from renewables. This is worldwide. And Texas, certainly we all know that, you know more data there in the details. is the U.S. is probably the most installed capacity in renewable capacity around within the U.S. The top one state. So we are within Breakthrough Energies, we are looking at this whole renewable energy in a system way. So it's a generation, but it's not just about generation, it's about how to provide reliability. So this earlier their comment made, as renewable energy start penetrating to the grid, then you see those issues about reliability, resilience really become very critical. The battery is one of the solutions. Today, battery is days and hours, but we are working on batteries that's much longer. So long duration energy storage are the technologies. There are startups, early startup, or some startup, they are already start building the manufacturing plan. So one of the companies called Form Energies, they're building their manufacturing, and it's under construction. Once it's fully commissioned, it's going to provide hundreds of megawatts and capacity, manufacturing capacity per year. Right, and then so it is generation. We're working on the floating offshore wind, and then also it's the transmission, and then also is the storage. So that's kind of an overall system view looking at the electricity. Not mentioning there are also critical materials. That's equally important when this electrification driven, and it's an important trend. Electrification is the trend, important trend of energy transition. So all of those elements. Yeah.
Brandon, so when you're working through your projects and you're looking at helping various customers electrify or access additional electricity or additional generation capacity, I guess what are you seeing on the ground? Like, what would you say are the top 3 challenges? And probably this is going to be based a little bit in and around Texas, right? But I wonder if you can also generalize some of those perspectives maybe across the U.S.
Yeah, well, we love the Texas market because of the growth, and it's a business-friendly state. It's about 70% of our business is here, and the rest spread out amongst another 47 states, regulated and deregulated. I would say the number one issue right now is site selection and interconnection. And even from a supply chain, large transformers are now starting to extend back out. They were coming in, and now lead times are starting to push back out for whatever reason. I saw something a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, that I'd never seen before in the ERCOT market, and I've been active in this market my entire career. And that was, I have a signed interconnection agreement with the utility for a stated amount of megawatts, and I go raise capital for my business, and then the utility calls me 6 months later and says, I know I gave you 300 megawatts, but it's actually going to be maybe 50 for the next 2 years because we have to build all of this behind the scenes as utility. You're dealing with a regulated utility, and we don't have those in the room, and they're a necessary evil for us. We've built out about 30% of the Encore distribution system. And so that's a big problem is just interconnection and capacity, site selection. It's not just here. It happened in the PJM. They kicked data centers out, shut it down. And the Samsung factory outside of Austin is really neat. It's unmanned. It's 5 stories, a couple of football fields long. They want to build 19 more. We just did a single gigawatt interconnection in Corsicana for a data center. Last year was the first single gigawatt interconnection where we were sliding 345 direct connect transformers and bus bars off a truck. We couldn't find a crane that was big enough to move it. So the demand is outpaced supply infinitely here in Texas, and that's going to be the issue. And I'll tell you, there's one factor that's really going on, because some states like Texas, you can privatize the distribution. You can go faster and cheaper than the utility. In the last 3 years, we've built about $1 billion worth of distribution, and you could call Encore or CenterPoint here in town and have them do it, but we can do it cheaper and faster. And the reason that's important is the commodity on the bill is becoming less relevant. It's a backwardated market. Right now, it's about half the bill. 10 years ago, it was 80% of the bill. T&D rates are rising. about 10% year over year the last 2 years here in Texas, and you have a backwardated commodity market, the electron is becoming less relevant on the bill. And if I go privatize the distribution component, the paybacks are inside 5 years because I don't pay the utility for distribution charges because I own that piece of it. So that's a dynamic in this state that's really advantageous for people coming in that need to hook up to their grid and go faster and cheaper.
So, Brandon, amongst the policy nerds, there's always been this discussion or this debate around how you, as a consumer of electricity, right, you get varying prices depending on when you use it, right? It's time-based variation, time-based, use-based variation in pricing. But there's always been this theory that if there's location-based pricing, where let's say if there are loads that you can create that is closer to a power generation site, or that doesn't have to use as much of the distribution or transmission infrastructure, they should be getting a slightly different price. Do you see any movement in and around that from a policy point of view?
I think that's really far out. We're doing very kind of Flintstone type work is what I call it, of, if I take a large load that has flexibility, and Bitcoin mining actually is in this state, it's prominent, and it's a great example because it's the most flexible load. They don't have to flare anything, they can just shut the whole facility off. And so when that interconnection happens, every day our business operators identify at what price should the business not run. And that's going to be the same thing for electrolyzers, and even in Governor Abbott's forecast, the flexible load, the mass majority of that over the next decade plus will be electrolyzers. Because they're flexible as well. If the electrolyzer calls the utility and says, hey, utility, if I shut down voluntarily, then I want you to cut me a check, the difference in the ERCOT spot price and my PPA price, you'll get laughed out of the utility. Like, we don't do that. But if I move $1 billion worth of their power as an advisor, and I have the imminent threat to say, well, if you don't want to give my customer that, and you don't want this gigawatt load, then I'm going to call NRG, I'm going to call Constellation, and I'm going to utilize that leverage to unlock that. And what does that do? Uri was a great example for us. Our customers shut down for 4.5 days. 16 of them, they made about $900 million shutting down. That paid on a 10-year PPA was 5 years worth of free power is what shutting down 4.5 days equated to. And we had similar results in August because it was really hot. So cleanest, cheapest source of energy is not consuming it, but if you don't reward me for making that decision and changing my behavior, then why do I care? And so that's what we're trying to do at a very, very large level. I think ultimately over decades, it'll, through IoT and everything else, our grandkids will get something on their phone in New York that says, hey, I'm moving your thermostat 2 degrees, here's a $20 gift card to go get pizza downstairs. And so they don't have to be educated, but you're giving me that inherent, that reward system for making that. That's tied directly to spot price.
Excellent, that's helpful. Jane, when you think of companies like Form Energy, right? These are commercial. These are startups that are commercializing fairly advanced, innovative technology, right? I guess at what point until what point does Breakthrough Energy support them, and at what point do they have to start finding other forms of financing? I know that Mr. Bill Gates has a lot of money, but just where does Breakthrough kind of stop its engagement?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And as I mentioned, Breakthrough Energy has 3 vehicles. They try to, I guess maybe I should start saying, the Breakthrough Energy cannot invest all for energy transition. Mm-hmm. It is more so try to really bring capitals to helping innovations crossing the valley of death. So that's the 3 programs is set up. For example, the fellows programs is helping innovations that's come from the brilliant professors and scientists that come from the university, the labs, to get to the world, right? So your first trench, potentially the valley of death. And then certainly the second one is more of investment vehicle. That's the venture, and Breakthrough Venture is acting like VC, but it's more patient and more with the understanding of the climate technology. Mostly are heavy industry related, the equipment, chemical processing related technologies. It does take time, take huge capital, and also takes more complex, what I would call the journey goes from lab to scaling up. It's not simple, venture give you money, next day you become the unicorn.
Yeah.
Right. So Breakthrough Energy understands that, even though they have this venture firm, but many of the round, if you will say the Breakthrough Energy portfolio company, when they close the round, and can be led by BEV, but joined by strategic partners and corporate CVCs. And so it's really that kind of a collaboration in that mid stage is very important, partnership with the industry, with the incumbent industry. Then the last one is the third one is called project financing, is also recognizing for many of those companies when they start building the first commercial, you really haven't built the track record. So if normally the industry at that stage, you'll get the debt financing, but in this case, you have to somehow convincing them the risk, even though technical risk, I can show you, I built my demo plan, I can run this for 2,000 hours, great. But we all know, the people we've been coming from the industry, we all know it's not just about that, it's everything else. If you're running a huge capital project, at the end of the day, building that plan. So the risk is still high. This is where also Breakthrough Energy catalysts come in, try to catalyze that phase of capital investment. Okay. So it's not simple like we stop here. But rather to look at what along that journey, where are the points, and Breakthrough Energy can really vary by bringing funding, but not alone, and can really helping that journey.
So it seems to be a fairly thoughtful approach, right? It feels like the entire value chain of how do you take early stage technologies and commercialize them was looked at, and areas where there are pain points, right, in terms of where things typically break down. It seems like Breakthrough is facilitating, I guess, creative ways to kind of address some of those pain points.
Yes.
Interesting. So, Brandon, I want to talk a little bit about storage, right? ERCOT is also one of the fastest growing storage markets in the country, right? I guess, how are you working with storage, and what are some applications where you are seeing storage find more traction?
Right now, I'm pretty bearish. Storage, I actually have been for a long time, and the Broad Reach gang was an old team of mine from former life in New York, and that was an NCAP-backed company. That was co-investment with Apollo. Early stage, they built over 1,000 megawatts, completely merchant, price dependent on the spot market. And when I see what's happening to price over the next 10 years, it's a long list of bearish factors, in my opinion. My business, I don't have an inventory of anything. I'm an advisor, I'm agnostic, so what I can say is I've got 10,000 customers and I can tell you what's working right now. I haven't done a single storage application. I've done $2.5 billion of behind the meter solar installations that are in progress, and that will continue. It makes sense. We got, off the back of the IRA, we've got additional, tax incentives specific to certain industries, and it just makes sense. When batteries make sense, that should be a double for us, and I'm happy to go plop one down, or any type of resiliency. Resiliency businesses, Southern's trying to sell Power Secure. There's early investment from I2 out there. Warburg's got one they're trying to sell. So there's more buyer's market for those businesses right now. And the point is that the power market's cheap. And so why would I install a battery unless I'm HEB and I need to keep my grocery stores on during a hurricane, when it's 5 times the cost of the forward market? Like, why would I do that? All of my customers want to decarbonize, by the way, and I love that. I got to follow Exxon because I was asked this question by a bunch of bankers yesterday of, at scale, an energy transition business focused on electrification, who's the natural owner of these businesses over the next 10 to 20 years? Exxon's going to be the winner of all this. So you probably heard of it, Houston's the energy capital of the world. It will be the new energy capital of the world, and they're the natural strategic there, and they'll win just at scale. The problem is you have to have a business that's $10 billion or more market cap to get their attention. So it's going to take some time, but they're the natural benefactor. So we're doing a lot of solar, not a lot of storage. We're doing a lot of distribution work because of what I said earlier, just rising T&D costs, and that's how consumers down to the residential level are paying for the transition. And so it's this crazy market that doesn't really reflect supply demand, but it is what it is. And so we do what's most economic for our customers, and right now it's not storage, and I see, just like resiliency shops, it's more of a, I'm trying to get out of storage because it's just too expensive, and the price signals right now are bearish in those markets. Doesn't make it right, but that's just the market.
So, but is that just because of where commodity prices and electricity prices are today?
Correct.
And, I mean, the long, maybe not even the long term, the medium term case for storage continues to be like you're adding a lot of renewable power capacity, it's intermittent, and therefore you need storage.
Okay, good point. I know what track you're going down, but lithium's not going to win. And I'm a mathematician. I don't understand, but it's not going to be lithium. There's going to be some new complex. The cost of storage has to go down. Duration there has to be more options for it. So it will play a role, but your point on, yes, there's 30 gigs of solar potentially coming to ERCOT, an 85 gigawatt system. And it's similar to the wind build out we had in the late 2000s. So that does bring intermittency, but what's also happening is, from the governor's office down, anybody of substantial size that's interconnecting this grid will provide flexibility back to it. And not in just forms of shutting down, but also, like the Bitcoin mining industry and electrolyzers, they will be providing primary frequency response to the grid. So they will be acting just like a gas generator as a demand. And so all those things are battle intermittency, they offset it. Mm-hmm. And so solar peak shaves, wind is inversely correlated with demand, flattens the curve, prices go down, and then volatility becomes shorter in nature, shorter frequency disruptions, and the load is the low-hanging fruit. If I hook that up where it moves around, whether it's residential aggregations or what have you, there's no CapEx for shutting half these lights off and opening the blinds. Mm-hmm. So why would I build a battery?
Yeah. So maybe I want to add maybe a couple of points in terms of storage. Indeed, I think that the cost of the storage is very important. And if you look at the so-called long duration energy storage space, some of the technologies and also some of the company start building their manufacturing plant. They are actually working on different form. It's not battery, right? So oftentimes also some of those, you could call, lack of better word, energy storage, I want to also use, they can also have a different application use case. For example, one of the companies that they're using sort of is heat storage, but then in turn they could also provide not only acting as a buffer for the grid, but also can provide heat, which is, we also mentioned earlier, energy transition is you try to electrify everything, but you can't. Some of the heavy industry processes do require heat. So some of those technology, you can see they start play the use case, try to synergizing, be the storage, and also be able to also provide the heat. One of the companies is named Antura, is working on something along those direction. And even the form energy we'll talk about, they're using a technology called air. It's a reversible
iron air flow batteries.
Battery.
So basically, they're trying to sidestep this whole lithium price volatility and all of that, right?
Right. Try to kind of counter. Those. Yeah, exactly.
So, Brandon, I mean, a lot of your customers are probably making capital decisions today based on the advice that you are giving on what the outlook for power markets looks like, right? But and these capital decisions, they'll have to live with them for 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, it's so I'm curious, right? I mean, if we are making decisions around, say, energy storage based on, fairly near to medium term outlook for, let's say, commodity prices, electricity prices. I guess, what is the optionality that they have to address the risk associated with stranded capital and things like that? Because these are super dynamic markets.
Yeah, it's a great point today. I'll change it a little bit, because I'm not prophesizing. I'm not the smartest guy in pretty much any room I've been in, so that's not what we do. What we do is we unveil that there's a lot of segmentation in electrification. And I'll give you an example. So everybody can pick up the phone and call a utility for power, and for C&I in Texas over the next 10 years, maybe that's 5.5 cents a kilowatt hour all in. I can go buy that today from a utility for 10 years. No problem. What we do is we say, well, if you privatize distribution, here's the CapEx, here's financing if you want to off-sheet it. That removes the distribution component. Your payback's 5.5 years. And I can show you that T&D rates are going like this, and the power market's backwardated. So that has, whether from an IRR or payback period, however you want to look at that, it makes a lot of sense, which is why there's this huge movement in privatizing distribution. And so if that's 25% of the bill, I'm down, below 4 cents a kilowatt hour, right at around 4 cents in that example. And then I look at, if you have a renewable goal, well, everyone wants to decarbonize 100%, and then you give them the cost for that, and they say, well, maybe, how about 50%? And then 40%, and it usually comes in around 30% behind the meter, because if you couple that with the distribution piece, you both qualify for the ITC, it has inherent benefit. And just consider that a wash versus the market, and then the PPA, and then you look at the consumption side to say, hey, if you give me 20 hours a year out of 8,760, the ability to curtail this load, that's going to produce about $6 or $7 a megawatt hour revenue. So that comes down. And so in high vol, low vol, high price, low price, putting that segmentation together as in an advisory capacity and operating that as a single income statement so those pieces talk to one another, and there's a lot of complexity to that, yields 30% savings on average to a customer. A lot of people will say bullshit, but we have a lot of customers in this room, and that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And so when I present that versus, or you could do a battery at 15 cents a kilowatt hour, it's not that the battery's wrong or may have an application in the future. These are all known variables right now, and I'm trying to decarbonize as economically as I can.
No, that's very helpful, I think. So if I were to paraphrase, I think what you're saying is that in some customer segments, the incremental value of adding storage is not high enough.
Correct.
In terms of what other factors give you in terms of optionality,
HEB is a great example. They've got nat gas gens because if a hurricane hits, they want to sell food to the community. And so they have a different way of valuing resiliency or storage.
Right.
And there are those demand centers, but it's not market-wide.
Okay. It's always fascinating to have these conversations, and I can sit here for a long time, but I need to open this up for questions from the audience to see what we have here. Alex?
Yeah, so this is a question for Brandon. So you mentioned all the mechanisms for reducing your rate. In Texas, where it's unregulated, in regulated areas, is it as feasible, or what can you do there?
It's different. It's certainly... Alex, it's easier in Texas because it's a great market. The design here, the only thing that resembles our cuts probably Alberta, which has a lot of renewable, a lot of volatility. But if we follow the demand, and if you look at kind of the IEA demand growth over the next 15 years, it really follows population. So Texas north, and then through the Midwest and Northeast up through that corridor. And so that Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, that's deregulated, different market structure. Certain states you can privatize, but maybe I don't privatize distribution, I'm building more microgrids. We just did an aggregation of 110 municipalities in southern Illinois. We're building a 30 megawatt community solar project for them. So there are different ways. The sales cycle is really painful in regulated markets, but what I'm seeing in states like Georgia and New Mexico, from the governor's office down, it's I want green industry. And so the governor of Georgia is getting involved with Southern and saying, we're bringing these businesses in, and my utility is not equipped to look at this. So we're being invited into those rooms. Excel and kind of the gas region of New Mexico into Colorado, they're just changed their solar tariff. And it's a very high demand weighted charge, which is going to make solar very economic behind the meter in New Mexico, which before that, horrible market, high price, everyone suffers, can't do anything about it. So it just depends on this. They're all different, but certainly we like Texas with the growth and just there's just a lot we can do here.
More questions? Anisha?
Hi.
We
Thank you.
have to take a power question from Nisha.
This one is definitely a power question. So Brandon, you made some very interesting points about resilience, reliability, how HEB, for example, they value the resilience a lot more. Presumably, some of the customers you're working with, as you're building out their distribution systems, you're kind of tuning into the level of resilience they want. So obviously there's, the point is that different strokes for different folks. So thinking a little bit more broadly about the system, right? I mean, power goes out at my house, not a big deal. I have to reset my alarm clock, right? Because I'm not usually there. So for me, 9 nines of resilience or reliability actually at my home is not important. What do you think, or do you have some comments then about calls for just broad brush needing to increase the reliability of the power grid for everybody, including people who don't value it, versus, more mechanisms to actually say, look, create the reliability for the customers who are willing to pay for it? Yeah,
there's a political way to answer this, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you my opinion with who's in the room. A family member, we have Senator Schwertner is actually in charge of ERCOT market reform post-Uri, so I'm pretty close to this. All the plans that have really been suggested have been horrible. And by the way, I'll pick on him. He's a doctor. He doesn't know shit about power market. The Buffett's plan to come in and overbuild the system got shut down, and all those things would drive prices entirely high, and they don't make any sense. We're trying to solve for 30, 40 hours a year. We don't need baseload capacity. And so I can tell you, we may have a painful 2 or 3 years ahead of us. I mean, we've had no winter. And I can tell you all the utilities that are short gamma in their portfolios that they sell to residential customers, and loads higher than they think, and prices are higher, and that's the nasty risk in that business. They were scared to death of this winter, trying to buy optionality, which we possess through some of the mining clients and kind of the more hyperscale data center clients. So I don't think it's a summer problem because of the solars coming quickly. So I think summers and winters from a risk perspective invert, and it's really a winter thing. I don't see like a gas pipeline issue that we had in Europe and Uri. A lot of that's been fixed, but just the demand is just staggering when it gets cold. So we get 2 or 3 years more solar down. Yes, people are building storage on a merchant basis. I think we're good. I'll also say that the governor down, they're throttling the interconnection process, and they've slowed it down drastically because you just can't handle the demand. So it's a great point and one to watch.
Okay, one last question, maybe.
I have one question I can ask?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So the question is to Brandon. Brandon, what do you think about the compensation mechanisms that is going to be implemented, at least in short and the midterm cycles, because of the penetration of renewables into the grid?
And your first point, was it compensation? Was the word?
Yeah, it's power compensations basically. The type of mechanisms. Because why I'm asking this question was that somewhere in July 2023, ERCOT basically released a report, about the instability in the Western grid, talking about 7 hotspots, which is likely to have this power imbalance scenarios in case there is going to be a there's going to be a winter actually like lasting for 2-3 days, like we had the winter frost that we had it. So what sort of mechanisms are going to be put into place in order to make sure that you are going to have a reliable grid?
Yeah, so I'll answer that two ways. One, which I think should happen, which is the best, and then what you as consumers should be thinking about if you have a really big power bill and a decarb goal and you don't quite know what to do. So what the grid needs is we're really limiting the demand side of the equation. And the reason it's been limited is the generators are pissed off because they sell into the ancillary service market, which is spinning reserves and grid support services to support frequency. And loads that are flexible can sell into that same market. And the loads dwarfed the generation over the last 5 years. And it drove prices down, which is another thing that's a problem with batteries, and they got in trouble during Uri because they sell into that same market. So it's a very bearish market. Should I build more CapEx and have more gas plants to service the risk that you're talking about? Or should I allow more flexible load to come in, right? And again, it's not just load of shutting things off, because that's intermittency. I've seen a Bitcoin miner like blow a city down because they were just testing and they shut 500 megawatts off, and you can't do that instantaneously. You throw frequency the other way and have outages. But providing frequency response, huge untapped potential. It's very political. There's lots of lawyers in all these meetings, and it's really a debate between the generation side and the load side. And now as a consumer, what I would say is, if on my pro forma for my hydrogen plant or whatever, if I have, here's my assumed cost per kWh for this over the next 30 years, and there's not books and books and books behind how that number is developed, then I think you should call and start asking for some help and some guidance. And the way our business works, it's not a commercial, but we don't work like McKinsey. Nothing wrong with McKinsey, but I'm not going to charge you $250,000 to put a PowerPoint together and tell you what you should do. What we do is we work for free, and we say, let us take a look at what you're doing. Let us listen to you. What are your growth plans? What are your decarb? And we have case studies all over the country. And so we can smell test it really quick. And a lot of times we say, you're doing a great job. There's really nothing more we can do. If you have another question, like call us back, we'd be happy to do that. So our business in this market is, I have to provide something economically undeniable so that you make a decision, and then I partner with you to go install and operate whatever that is. So it's a great point, but I think more from the load side and not the gen side, and certainly not something like the Buffett's plan that that would have driven prices up at least 50% for the consumers.
Thank you.
I'm sure there are more questions, but unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end. Brandon, next year we're going to have a longer conversation so we can address all of these questions. And Jane, thank you so much again. Let's give them a hand, please.
Thank you.